All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, it's 2024. There's an election year. And, of course, our politics right now are really, really good. They're very wholesome. They're very democratic. And I think the one thing that we really need more than anything else to really just affirm our strong democratic principles in this republic here is we just need a big, strong man to go out there on the Senate floor and just tell the fucking truth to the world. Would you agree with that, Brian?
Historically, speaking truth to people in power in America does work. If you point out hypocrisies, if you point out moral failings to the ruling class of America, traditionally they go, wow, we fucked up. We're sorry. How shameful of us. Thank you.
Exactly. And, apparently, Brian, this overwhelmingly base liberal attitude that I'm talking about right now is actually reflected in the final Billy Jack movie. A movie we just totally haven't even fucking gotten to. So how about we just review that fucking movie for this week?
Well, I'm nothing if not someone who hates Billy Jack. I hate the series. I hate Tom Laughlin. I hate talking about him.
Yeah, I
consider him a
hate
great
his face.
enemy. Basically, the antithesis of what I want to talk about on this show is Tom Laughlin. So if you insist...
You know what? I will fucking insist, Brian, because even though I fucking hate Tom Laughlin too, and I hate base libs in general, we just have to fucking talk about it because we need to talk about...
I guess we did the first three.
Yeah, we fucking might as well at this point. But yes, without further ado, our review for this week is the final full film in the Billy Jack series, but not the last Billy Jack episode. Billy Jack Goes to Washington. But before we get into our review, Brian, I think we should bring back our segment here, Cringe Millennial of the Week. Week. Woo! Yeah! All right. And you know what, Brian? I think you and I came to an agreement today. Today, we're recording this on March 28th specifically. And we just had a giant loser of a cringe millennial this week. Would you agree with that, Brian? On this day specifically.
I mean, this is probably one of the most hateful people we've talked about on the show. And I'm including, we talked about like the fucking snuff guys on during the snuff series. I would say that this guy is
Army Hammer last week.
Yeah, I would argue that this person has maybe I'm not being glib, I promise, has caused more human suffering and more destruction of lives than those people.
You are 100% correct. I mean, he had a Super Bowl commercial where he advertised his shit products.
Such bullshit. We live in fucking hell.
Yeah. But yes, without further ado, we're going to talk about...
Israel had a Super Bowl commercial this year, too.
That's actually true. But yeah, so this week we're going to be talking about the infamous figure, Sam Bankman-Fried. Now, to all the audience at home who may not know who Sam Bankman-Fried was, he was the former CEO of FTX, which was a primarily crypto trading network. And he just got sentenced today in federal court to 25 years in prison for defrauding billions of dollars from investors. Did you hear what his restitution was?
No, I did not. I was following the SBF stuff pretty closely a few months ago, but I kind of tuned out till today, if I'm being honest.
So not only does he have to serve 25 years in prison, and federal prison in the federal system does not have parole, so he will have to serve at least 22 and a quarter years, at least, in prison. And he has to pay $11 billion in restitution.
Where's all that coming? Well, I guess, and I alluded to this privately talking with you about this. I mean, he does have like super rich daddy, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'll fucking see.
I hope he fucking kills himself in prison.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Well, that's the thing, though. Because, you look at pictures of him, he's just this, just twig-looking motherfucker. He looks like listen, I'm not trying to say a mean thing here. He looks like a pedophile. I'm gonna be honest with you. He is not going to handle being in prison very well at all.
So, I agree. Let's go even further with this. Let's cancel the pedophile thing for now, just to be generous and be a little more literal. He looks exactly like what he is. He looks like an Adderall addict, video game addict, who wears fucking cum-stained sweatpants and doesn't brush his hair. He looks exactly like what he is, which is the most loser ass millennial ever.
Yes.
Truly a perfect specimen for our show. And fucking dweeb who made all of his money by acting so fucking autistic in front of investors because he couldn't fucking make eye contact or stop playing Skycraft. Well, I don't know what the fuck he played. That they were like, wow, he must be a genius because no one would act so retarded publicly. Well, no, he's just an absolute cringe millennial.
I think it was League of Legends, but I could be wrong about that. I think. And apparently he was like a really bad League of Legends player. He wasn't even a good League of Legends player.
He's like painting Warhammer figures during a
Oh,
like,
shit,
this guy's
but...
so fucking smart. He smells like shit. He must be a genius.
Well, to be fair, everybody thought that fucking Steve Jobs, and he infamously smelled like shit all the time.
No, Steve Jobs, probably one of the most foul-smelling men ever. But I at least can understand, like, Steve Jobs was, like, doing a con and, like, being charismatic, smelling like a fucking ape aside. Whereas Sam Bankman-Fried just absolutely was acting like a failsome in front of investors, in front of everyone. And they were like, whoa, this must mean he's awesome.
That's actually a very good point. Yeah, because like for Steve Jobs, like the con eventually worked because he had people like fucking Wozniak who saved his ass from going to prison. Like Woz saved him from essentially dying in a ditch or going to prison.
I mean, if we want to talk about, I mean, obviously, I have no love for any of these people particularly. If we want to talk about based libs, there are some people in Jobs' orbit, Wozniak included, who I could give some, not Jobs himself, piece of shit, rot in hell, I don't give a shit. But, you know, Wozniak gave away shares to people that Jobs screwed out, which I always think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and from everything I've heard, that like Woz is like an actual genius, so I got to give him a little bit of credit.
Like a genius, yeah. Whereas Sam Bankman-Fried, what did he? Because Jobs at least had a product. He did have a vision. I'm not particularly a fan of it. You know, I don't care about it really. But there was something there. He had some sort of gumption. What was Sam's big innovation? Just to steal money. It's actually good to steal money. It's actually altruistic to steal from people.
Oh yeah, God, that fucking, what was it? Something
effective altruism.
Effective altruism. God, what a con. That lasted like 3 months until everybody involved was like, yeah, fuck this. We're all con artists and we're all gonna go to Nauru, I think it was, like some random Pacific island, which by the way can't even grow its own food. Nauru land is literally barren. They streamlined it decades ago.
That's like the ultimate libertarian fantasy. That's as far as their imagination can go, is what if we had an island?
Yeah, what if we had an island where nothing fucking grows in the apocalypse? You're gonna starve to death in 3 days. Like, what the fuck?
They're gonna fucking kill each other and not eat each other because they wouldn't be able to stomach it.
Yeah, or they're like, oh, well, they didn't technically consent to eating them yet. We have to sign up a contract before we're allowed to eat them, so we're going to starve.
Yeah, libertarians are really big advocates of consent.
Well, they always talk about consent, Brian, so they must very much care about it.
Man, maybe someday we should do a sovereign citizen. We can find a sovereign citizen themed movie so we can just really lay into it. That's great boomer Gen X stuff.
You know, honestly, though, Brian, I think the Waukesha car guy was, I mean, of course, he was a sovereign citizen, but I think he is a millennial, so maybe him.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, yep, he was born in 1982, so yep, he is a millennial.
Yeah, firmly a millennial.
Yeah. Oh, shit. But you know, speaking of the consent of the people, let's just get into this fucking review here. So once again, as I mentioned, this is the final full Billy Jack film. Came out in 1977. It was not rated by the MPAA or MPA just because it had a very limited theatrical run. In fact, the only major market it actually played in for any length of time was the Milwaukee film market, which is very surprising because Tom is from Milwaukee. But still, that's the only market. And once again, this film was directed by Billy Jack himself, Tom Laughlin, and it was written by him and his co-partner and spouse, Dolores Taylor, and it was produced by Frank Capra Jr., son of Frank Capra, who is most well known for directing such movies as, you know, fucking Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which Billy Jack Goes to Washington is a direct remake of.
I think some people assume that the title is like a joke. This is literally a remake of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
And part of the trivia that I have is apparently Frank Capra Jr. went up to Billy Jack himself and asked him to remake Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And I was blown away by that because I would have sworn it was the exact opposite way around.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Apparently Frank Capra Jr. wants more based lib movies out, or did, I should say, he passed away years ago, but he wanted more based lib movies out there.
Wonder if they're going to come back this year or, you know, in the next couple of years.
I think if Jon Stewart decides to come back full time, I think we might get more based lib content. I think.
Just someone to make it fashionable again. Because it was so unfashionable for liberals to be tough at all for like the last, 10, 15 years?
Oh, yeah, easily. Like at least since Trump got in office, at the very bare minimum. For sure.
But probably for my money, even end of the Obama term. By then, they were so in on being just smug and meh.
I would say like around the time that BuzzFeed became prominent is when libs stopped being based.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And of course, we've mentioned Tom Laughlin a million times on the show. He's, of course, most famous for this movie series. And he also starred in some other movies, such as The Master Gunfighter, as well as some other small productions. And I think you said, Brian, you want to cover Master Gunfighter at some point, right?
Well, we will definitely cover Master Gunfighter. Eventually, I plan to go back and do all of Tom Laughlin's films, including his 60s output, which he directed, I believe, but didn't star in. I mean, I figure we're far enough in, we may as well go all the way in eventually.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
But we're definitely going to do Master Gunfighter. Because that's basically, like, what I've heard is that's basically Billy Jack in the Old West.
Interesting. Okay. To be fair, I mean, Billy Jack movies are basically Western, so that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, I mentioned Dolores Taylor, the writer of this film, and of course, she was Tom Laughlin's wife, and she was only ever involved in the Billy Jack movies. That's it, which I always thought was really fascinating because, like, she's pretty prominent in basically all the movies outside of the first one. So yeah, I think it's really interesting that these were the only movies she ever was involved in.
It is. It's one of the most interesting facets of the whole series, I think. And I know we brought it up, touched on it in the past, but these really are, for Tom and Dolores, very active part of this series, Tom's wife, Dolores. But they were not, like, necessarily making these movies to pivot into, like, movie stardom or even film careers. No. They were doing these for political reasons. And you know, we will talk about the politics and what works and what doesn't. Obviously, not everything's going to be a bullseye. But it is really interesting to me that there's this big, ambitious, iconic series. And it's basically like, that's the finish line for it, is we are making these for a political movement and for causes. Because you don't see that a lot, even with very political movies.
You know, Brian, I disagree. I don't think the Billy Jack movies are political at all. I think they're just good, wholesome entertainment. And the fact you see politics in them, Brian, I think is very cynical on your part.
Are we getting into this now, or
no? Let's get into it at the end of the review because, man,
okay.
The fact that there are people out there, and you've interacted with them personally, that legitimately believe that these are not political movies is baffling to me.
When we get there, I spent a lot of the last couple of weeks grappling with these people and thinking about all these different perspectives. I have a few ideas on how someone might turn up that way, but it is insane. These are, okay, I think these are very entertaining movies, and I'm sure Tom and Dolores intended to make an entertaining movie. I'm going to say entertainment is secondary in the Billy Jack series to the message. That is not an insult. I'm being literal. I think Tom Laughlin probably sacrificed some entertainment value to front load his message. And I love these movies. I love Tom and Dolores. So don't take that as a slam, but entertainment value is secondary, I think, to them regarding these films.
No, absolutely. And, you know, once we get into the synopsis, I will say, even though this film, I would say, is maybe the most, I don't want to say dull. I don't think this movie's dull, but it is definitely the most, like, black and white of all the Billy Jack movies, for sure. Like, there's only one action scene. It lasts, like, a minute.
There's literally one. So there's already action in the Billy Jack series, as the listeners will remember from our previous episodes. It's already pretty slim. The real drama in Billy Jack is listening to Tom talk. It's him getting to fucking own reactionaries with logic. And I'm not being sarcastic. It's compelling, but that's the drama in his films. The action is kind of, I think, here to bring kids in. The promise of action, I should say.
Yeah, promise of action.
I love these movies. This is not, I feel like I sound like I'm like being sarcastic and I'm not.
No, you're 100% correct, though. You are absolutely 100% correct.
But the thing when you watch it, and I think that even spoke to many people who watched this movie when it came out, were kids and thought that made an impression. I feel like when you got there and those kids were sitting in that theater, what you really respond to is Tom Laughlin giving this impassioned monologue that maybe told you a thing that kids in the 70s maybe had never heard before. And that is where the drama comes in. But in this movie, that is even more explicit because there is literally one action scene and it feels pretty obligatory, and Billy Jack spends most of it talking.
Oh, man, I'm so excited to get to the synopsis here, but I'm just going to finish the details real quick. So we're talking about Frank Capra Jr. So he was actually the former president of Screen Gems, and I didn't put any of his credits in here, so just look up what Screen Gems did. They were a big, big movie distributor and production company in the 90s and 2000s. They did a lot of shit. So I'm just going to put that out there. And so one of the more contentious things about finding details for this movie was finding the length of this film, because supposedly this movie is 155 minutes long. Now, I looked up and down the fucking internet. The only version I could find is 114 minutes. And including one that was on Dailymotion that was super duper long, is, you said it was just a loop of the movies that probably somebody fucked up, right?
Dailymotion one, first of all, when you add it all together, it's actually something like 2 hours 45, but it's actually 115. And then on the third part, it's segmented into 3 parts because Dailymotion. After the movie ends, it just starts over. The third part of that sequence is the first half hour of the movie looping. I'm not sure what's going on with that. I did watch it on Dailymotion because I don't have access to my DVDs right now. I do have the Billy Jack box set, and my box set definitely is 115 minutes. Taylor, you had mentioned that it's possible that the 155 is a typo?
It might be a typo, or it just also might be that was the original theatrical run, and because the theatrical run did extremely poorly, I think they just kind of shelved that version. It might be essentially just lost media. I looked for like an hour, and I just couldn't fucking find it. I was just like, is this even real? And it might be a typo too, I don't know, but it says on Wikipedia and on Letterboxd, and I think maybe even on IMDb it's 155 minutes, but I'm like, where? Fucking where?
And that's one of the things. This is actually a thing that we talked about on the Born Losers episode, and we kind of got away from it. But these movies, for as iconic as they are not well documented. It's actually really hard to find any sort of solid information about the production or even about Tom and Dolores and kind of like their process for making them. And apparently it's hard to even know how long this movie was supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, the producer of Billy Jack, the second movie, which I think we mentioned in a later episode, was literally the highest grossing film of 1971. Its producer is literally an unnamed individual by internet standards. They don't even have an IMDb page. Like, that is insane to think about. Could you imagine if the fucking, like, The Matrix, for example, or whatever the highest grossing movie in 1999 was, had a producer that nobody knew who the fuck it was? That'd be baffling. That would make no sense. Like, what the fuck?
I wonder if that guy was not a movie guy. Maybe he was a politics guy.
Maybe. Well, you know what we're talking about?
I mean?
We're talking about budget and box office. So this movie, I found one source, a dubious source, that said this movie had a budget of about $7 million. And I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to put it in there because I couldn't find any other source that said anything. So that's the only reason
that
I
seems
put that
plausible.
in there. And I couldn't find a box office, but you know, as I mentioned earlier, that this movie played for a couple weeks in Milwaukee in 1977. And it was announced as a pre-release screening, but after it just absolutely bombed, it just never actually had a full theatrical release. So very tragic there. And then the next trivia fact I have here is a direct segment off of that. So Tom Laughlin blamed the movie's limited release on a government conspiracy to suppress it. I think he also said that about the trial, but I could be wrong about that.
I believe that about Trial of Billy Jack.
And then interestingly enough,
little more skeptical about whether that's the case in Goes to Washington.
And that's the thing. So at the time, Laughlin was fighting several lawsuits preventing him from giving the movie as big a release as a bigger release as his previous movies. He tried to get other distributors to release it, and Samuel Arkoff, head of American International Pictures, who I believe released Born Losers and Billy Jack, recalled several years later going to Laughlin's house to watch a screening of the movie. Arkoff said Tom had gained about 40 pounds since the earlier pictures.
That's not so bad.
And said that Billy Jack, or should I say Going to Washington, just didn't recapture the charm and disarming character he had played in the original. Feeling that the movie was not commercial, Arkoff passed on the chance to distribute it. Other distributors who saw the movie made the same decision. So yeah, just it was a movie that he wanted to clearly make. He clearly had passion, because once we get to the end in our synopsis here, Tom is giving a fucking masterful performance at the end of this movie. He is putting his all into this fucking performance here.
Yeah, like, this is probably, on a traditional level, this is probably his best acting in the Billy Jack series, at least. I understand being concerned about the commercial viability of this picture. And you might be able to say that about previous Billy Jack films. But again, those movies are crazy. Crazy stuff happens. They're pretty violent at moments, at least. There's a lot of youth culture stuff. This movie is basically like a civics lesson. Again, I'm not saying this to be sarcastic. Like, that's its function.
Yeah, this is like Schoolhouse Rock, but of Billy Jack. That's what this movie is, like, straight up.
I think that was what he was trying to do with this. Truly, was to make
a base lib.
Kids. Yeah, and he's like, I got to teach the kids about Senate. I got to teach them how the sausage is made.
And then speaking of the results, if they like the sausage or not. So on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has a 0% critic score and a 36% audience score. Out of 8 total reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, nobody liked this movie. And you know what? I say, fuck you. Honestly, this film is not bad. It's not bad. Why is this movie like nobody likes it? I don't understand.
I think that the reason for that might be, so I'm pretty comfortable saying this is the weakest Billy Jack film. Like, of the finished films, this one is not quite as compelling as the earlier ones, especially The Trial of Billy Jack, which I think is kind of an amazing movie. The only audience for this movie, because it's so weird, because it is so single-minded that it exists to get its politics forward, is a Billy Jack fan who also is at very least sympathetic to the politics and who doesn't mind basically social studies class. Very limited commercial appeal for this. And I think the person I just described is Taylor, you and I.
Seriously?
Guys like us.
I'm so excited to get into the synopsis here. So, let's just get into the synopsis here. So the movie begins with, once again, Billy Jack, played by Tom Laughlin, is appointed a U.S. senator to fill out the remaining term of another senator. Now, we need to just do a real quick recap. So I don't know if Born Losers is canon for this series. I don't think it is. But at the very least, in Billy Jack in Trial, he's killed multiple people. He is a political radical. He is basically Leonard Peltier. And they're like, let's give Leonard Peltier a Senate seat. Like, what the fuck? It makes no sense.
And just to be clear, he has not chosen to be given a Senate seat because he's a radical. He is seen by these kind of bigwigs as, oh, this is a guy that we can mold and push around and he'll get us the youth vote.
Even that's stupid.
Yeah. And again, like you said, Taylor, he is like a politically radical figure in Trial.
Yeah, and once again, though, a guy who not only kills people, but is willing to commit violence to defend his beliefs and, his rights to exist. That's a guy who you think will be a pushover in government? Yeah. What the fuck?
This guy who almost killed a bunch of cops at the end of the trial.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus. And as somebody who is just willing to go up to, a corrupt sheriff and just, fucking kick him right in the face in broad daylight. Jesus. And this is a guy you think you want to appoint this guy to government? Insane they thought that would be a good idea. But
and literally the reasoning is the youth culture will like him. I just don't.
They're like, hey, we want to have a diverse guy. And they literally say he's half Indian. So we want to have a diverse guy who will appeal to all the people that we hate and we get fucking the FBI to kill. It makes no sense. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in a movie. Although I'm just like, oh my God, I have to see where the fuck this goes because this is
so premise is already shaky. Because the premise of the earlier Billy Jack films, it makes sense. He's presumably a traumatized vet. He's half Native American. He's politically leftist or kind of a radical leftist or left-leaning liberal or whatever. He's kind of alludes to labor stuff and things and, kind of champions the marginalized. And he gets himself in these situations that are dangerous to him. Okay, this is him as a senator. But once we accept that, I guess the movie falls into place, but it's quite a leap to make.
No, God, yeah. But yeah, so it is hoped that he will quietly vote the party line. Once again, we just explained how that's ridiculous. But his term in the Senate runs into trouble when he proposes a bill to fund a national youth camp, which happens to be on the property where a nuclear power plant is also being proposed. That's another element of this movie that I think is really politically problematic. This movie is very clearly anti-nuclear power. And I'm sorry, in the year 2024, seeing a movie where it's nuclear power is really bad. And it's the earth is dying. We are cooking the earth. Nuclear power would have saved us so bad fucking 50 years ago.
It's so funny to think because, the whole conceit that liberals have, because a lot of liberals and left-leaning people oppose nuclear power and nuclear energy. And you got to think it's word association. They're thinking the nuclear bomb was bad. So do I want a nuclear bomb to be powering civilization? That's the logic of it, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, I mentioned it to you the other day, but for example, Germany basically shut down all of their nuclear power plants and they basically converted to using coal and natural gas. And really the only place they get natural gas from is Russia. Two countries that famously have gotten along historically, Germany and Russia. What could possibly go wrong? And it turns out everything could go wrong. And now people are spending thousands of euros a month sometimes to heat their fucking homes.
To heat their homes, yeah.
Geez, imagine they just had nuclear power. They would have paid €5 a month. Ridiculous. Just shooting themselves in the foot for no fucking reason other than this fucking fear-mongering bullshit about nuclear power. Just nonsense.
I mean, normally I would say, I'm not going to hold a filmmaker to task. But again, like we said, Tom Laughlin makes these movies to get a political worldview across. And so I don't think at any point that this movie expresses any sort of alternative for nuclear power.
Nope, not at all. They don't say wind, they don't say solar, they just say he's essentially a NIMBY for this nuclear power plant.
Yeah, yeah. And that begs the question to me. And again, I love Tom Laughlin. I admire him a lot. But did he maybe his ambitions political for the message he wanted? Did he get a little too big? Because he seems to handle most of the stuff in trial well. There's some weird stuff about violence and kind of language towards marginalized people in trial that not crazy about that we talked about. But he seemed to like have a pretty coherent view of like power dynamics and violence against oppressed people. But it's almost like he wanted to get bigger. He wanted to go environmental, I guess. And like maybe he just shouldn't have.
No,
maybe
honestly.
he should have just made this movie about marginalized group being harmed or something. Because that's the thing that he at least seems to understand to some degree.
Well, he didn't understand the child abuse segment in fucking Trial very well.
That was so insane, though. That's so wild. I almost can't even get mad about it because it's fucking nuts.
At least he was trying. I'll give him credit for that one.
At least he was acknowledging that child abuse exists, I guess.
Yeah. In the most, like, ridiculous way possible. I mean, a way that could technically exist, but just in, like, that's not typically how child abuse goes. Fucking
yeah.
Jeez, but his fellow senator, Joseph Payne, played by the actor E.G. Marshall, claims to oppose nuclear power, but is secretly taking graft to influence his votes in favor, and moves to try to keep Billy Jack out of the way when the bill is being debated. Now, I want to get to a little bit about Senator Payne. So Senator Payne is somebody who was a friend of Billy Jack's uncle, right? Was it grandfather? Yes. Okay, so
grandfather.
Grandfather, yeah. That's it. And he's the guy who, you know, as we learn basically throughout the movie, he's a guy who probably was not as radical as Billy Jack's grandfather, as you could probably imagine, because, you know, a native guy versus a white guy, especially back then, I mean, that was almost just never going to happen. But, like, he was, by his standards, this Joseph Payne guy was a pretty strong progressive, maybe even a radical by those times. He got into the Senate, and he kind of, like, sold his soul to basically...
He's Bulworth.
Exactly. Yep. It's a great way to put it. He's basically Bulworth. And he, very much decided to basically sell his, like, soul to try to get some good things done, but also compromise a lot of his values. That's essentially where he's at as a senator. He tried to fix the system within, and they say in the movie, you can't fix the system from within. This is a 50-year-old movie saying that, which is wild. Yeah,
so we'll talk shit about the nuclear power thing. That shit sucks. But I think for its time, its kind of view on, you know, I guess incrementalism is pretty on point, I would say. More kind than you might expect.
Yeah, up until the very end, I think it's very, very coherent for, like, a modern audience to see this and be like, oh, wow, they called that 50 fucking years ago. Like, holy shit. So, seeking to keep Billy Jack out of the Senate on a day when a controversial energy bill is voted on, Senator Payne suggests he should meet with grassroots group that day instead. The group is working to pass a national initiative, and Billy Jack becomes convinced of their cause. Now, I believe this is also around the same point. There's a B plot where, like, I think is he a reporter or a lobbyist who gets a hold of some of these documents about this nuclear power plant, and he's, like, trying to sell it.
He's a reporter.
He's a reporter. Okay. Yeah. He tries selling it to various sources. Eventually, he gets somebody to buy it. And then the very hilarious line, even though it's not a badass line, kind of, but then you think about it, it's kind of stupid. What was it? Like, pigs get rich and hogs get slaughtered?
Pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. And it's like, oh, that sounds cool. That's a cool villainous line. But then you think about it and you're like, what? I mean, they both get slaughtered.
And then eventually that guy gets assassinated. And there's also is she like a secretary, or who is she?
Yeah, she's like a secretary for the press who I guess has aspirations of journalism.
Yeah, and eventually she's like just so shaken up by this assassination and all the death that she's seen that she's like, fuck this, I'm out of here. I can't take this bullshit anymore. Although she comes back later in the movie, but she's like, Billy Jack, I know you just got to the Senate 2 days ago, but you better leave before you get killed. And he's like, I just got here. Like, I just got here. I just moved my shoe rack in the office here, lady. No.
Yeah, she's like tut-tutting him, and then all of a sudden she likes him.
I just found a hook to put my hat on.
Yeah.
Famous Billy Jack hat.
The famous Billy Jack hat, yeah. He's got like a bust of himself that he puts the hat on.
Yeah. Oh my God. Could you imagine if Billy Jack was a senator in real life and they would just have like a bust of him in the Senate office and he's wearing the hat? That would be so awesome.
That'd be so cool.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, honestly, I think that hat got lost, didn't it? I think it got lost.
I don't know. I feel that sounds like that might be right. Wait. I might have to push back on that because I saw a post by Tom's nephew on the official Billy Jack fan Facebook page. I don't know how old it is, where he posted the hat next to a pair of urns that belonged to Tom and Dolores.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how long ago that was, but it looked, probably in the, it was after their deaths, So he might have the hat. Maybe it was not the same hat. I don't know. It looked to be.
We'll have to go see it someday in person. We'll make a pilgrimage to wherever that hat is.
I would absolutely take a pilgrimage to go see Billy Jack's hat, to be honest.
Hell yeah, dude. All right. And then after the assassination scene, there's a lot of other dialogue that happens. And then eventually, though, we get to the one fucking action scene in the movie that happens at about the halfway mark. And it's a scene where Dolores and I think their real life daughter, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think that's her.
I think so. I believe so.
Gets cornered by a bunch of black gang members who threaten to rape them. This is what happens in the movie. I'm just repeating what happens.
The way you're saying it makes it sound either better or worse than it is. We'll get to it.
Yeah. I mean, they literally pull out knives and say, close off now. So,
that could have been for safety reasons. Maybe they were concerned that they had weapons in their clothes.
Well, we'll just go with that. And then, obviously, this extremely racially charged scene, Billy Jack walks in. And there's just some hilarious lines that Billy Jack says, including one that I actually put on
whose
here.
idea was it to use black assassins? Are they trying to make it look like a racial incident? That's my favorite one.
My favorite one is, I think it was something about Kunta Kinte would look down on you.
Yeah, yes, he just did.
It's like,
what would Kunta Kinte?
Yeah, honestly, I'm looking it up right fucking now because I want to get it exactly. Here we are. He literally says, Kunta Kinte would turn over in his grave if he saw you hire out to the man like this because Billy Jack says they're like FBI agents, which they might be. I don't know, but they could also just be guys wanting to violate and maybe murder women. It could be, I don't know who the fuck it could be, but it could be anybody.
Well, so yeah, that's the implication that we're supposed to take at face value that Billy Jack presents is that Billy Jack's enemies in the Senate have hired some black men to attack his family, to make it look like Billy Jack has been involved in a racially charged, violent attack. So what Laughlin is attempting to say is not quite as bad as... It's very convoluted, but do you follow what I'm saying?
No, I totally get what you're saying.
Okay, so what it looks like on screen, if you are not paying very close attention, is like these black guys have attacked this liberal senator's family, and they don't understand that he's a liberal. But this is not made explicit enough. These guys are paid off, and the whole idea is to make Billy Jack look like he has some conflict with black people, I guess. That's what Billy Jack's enemies are trying to make the public think. No, it's very strange. This is not the best Billy Jack film.
That's the best way to just describe this scene. This is not the best Billy Jack movie after watching this specific scene.
And I mean, I just want to say, anyone listening to this, we're fans of these movies, so we're pretty generous with them.
I'm very generous to these movies.
Yeah, because, there's things we really like about them. But we have been very generous to this series. And this is, again, I own the box set. I'm trying to get all Tom's books. I'm a genuine fan. I can't be as generous to this film because this scene is weird. He didn't think this through. No. And what he's trying to say, there has to be a better way to present what he said, which is that, I guess, okay, the idea of people in power try to sow racial divides amongst the left to kind of trickle things out to the public to create splinters where there aren't. That does happen. That is a thing with historic precedents. The way this movie that's a pretty complicated topic though, right? It's a pretty delicate subject and there's lots of layers to it and there's kind of some nuance, right?
And there's a reason why the government does it is because it's extremely complicated, but it's also generally pretty fucking effective too.
And I do believe that Laughlin is aware of that and that's what he's trying to allude to. If you are not paying very close attention to the scene and you don't already know what kind of guy Tom Laughlin is, it's a weird scene. It's a weirder scene if you don't already know that he, a pretty good guy. Yeah, you guys know what we're saying.
Yeah, if you don't know anything about Tom Laughlin or you don't know anything about COINTELPRO or the stuff in Chicago with the Black Panthers and if you don't know that stuff already, this scene is probably very fucking weird to a normal modern audience.
Because it's already pretty weird, just because it's not handled great. But again, actually, the whole Chicago stuff and the kind of the disinformation or something like that is what he's alluding to. But it all happens in like 30 seconds, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, a pretty good action scene on top of it, but it is also an action scene in a Billy Jack movie on top of it too. Like,
so already Billy Jack films, their action scenes are good, they're fun to watch, they're cool, but what really makes them work usually is that they're emotionally satisfying. We get to watch Billy mollywop a racist cop or a rapist or something. But this whole, I guess, like race trader angle, it doesn't have the action scene itself is fine. It's actually one of the better choreographed Billy Jack action scenes, I think. But it's not satisfying emotionally in the same way, and it's the only action scene in the film.
Yeah, and like, to be honest with you, like, if you ignore just a couple lines, let's be clear here, this could be in like a fucking Death Wish movie.
Death Wish, exactly. I thought the exact same thing. And the thing is, I don't like saying that. I don't like the idea. I don't know. It makes me sad to think of Tom and Dolores. Did you get this feeling of them watching the movie maybe 20 years later and watching the scene and going, oh no?
Yeah, I would not be surprised by that. Because, like, you know, obviously in the right hands, this could be a very based lib moment, and like a based lib. Like, even the base libs are like, oh, that might be a little bit too far. Like, you know what I mean? But in this specific era of Tom Laughlin, it comes across very clumsy, I would say.
It's a bummer. And I don't think it's hateful.
It's definitely not hateful, but it is weird as shit.
I don't want to say that I don't think Tom Laughlin could have written about like race in some meaningful way. I think he definitely could, but it's just bad. It just doesn't, I don't know. It's a bummer, man.
Well, you know, also, I mean, this is, you know, totally off topic from, you know, I shouldn't say off topic, but like, you know, of course, Tom Laughlin, you know, grew up on the north side of Milwaukee. He went to, you know, Washington High School, as we mentioned, you know, went to the same school as fucking Gene Wilder and Bob Seelig and Herb Cole, like very famous Wisconsinites, you know, and nowadays that is like almost exclusively like black neighborhood. And, you know, he came of age in an era when Milwaukee was starting to finally desegregate in the 60s. So like he could have a lot to say about like racism in a particularly infamous city for like fucking black and white racism, Milwaukee. You know what I mean? Like,
not to be cynical, it's a little funny to say that Milwaukee was ever desegregated.
Well, okay.
Still pretty segregated.
I meant legally segregated. That's what I meant. But no, you are totally correct on that, Brian. I should have clarified, instead of de jure, it is now just de facto. I should have clarified on that. But yes, you are very correct. And also, Brian, that's a lot to say coming from you in Portland. I'm fucking around, but
Portland isn't segregated. They're just not here.
That's also a good point. I also love, and by the way, I'm sort of joking with the whole Portland knob, but it is always really funny when like white liberals and stuff are like, oh, this place is the most racist city in America. And it's like, by every metric, every major city in America is the most racist major city in America. Like,
yeah. So the people you hear that most from, you definitely hear that from, we are going on a little bit of a tangent, but we'll tie it back on. So you definitely have people that live in Portland that think of Portland as very liberal and progressive, which it's not. But what I encounter more as a transplant is people that don't live in Portland that assume that it's very progressive because that's what its like national brand is. And then you say like, actually it's, and then you have to tell people about like the Northwest method and things. And people that live in Portland think that's like some crazy thing that I made. I've told people about the Northwest method and they've been like, and this is what? And I'm like, this is like a thing that Nazis do to take over your cities.
Yes, exactly. God, Jesus. Oh man, yeah, let's get back to the synopsis. I love that digression, but let's just get back to the synopsis here. No, it's okay. It was a great digression. I genuinely mean it. But after that action scene, Billy is invited to meet with a group of lobbyists attempting to offer him bribes and other perks if he will vote their way. Up against a man named Bailey, played by the actor Sam Wanamaker, who wields a powerful influence in his home state, Billy Jack has his political career and reputation at stake if he does not cooperate. Billy Jack responds with anger at their threat. The next day in the Senate, he tries to speak on the floor in opposition to the nuclear power plant. Payne responds by proposing to expel Billy from the Senate as unfit for office. Now, that is the plot for the rest of the movie. The last like 40, 50, I think even 50 minutes of this movie.
This is the conflict of the movie. It is almost an hour of it. And I like this movie. This is actually where I actually think it's really compelling. It starts to really
I agree. Here. This is my favorite part of the movie. The second half is easily my favorite. In all honesty, like even though the action scene is probably I wouldn't even agree, is the best like shot and fucking choreographed fight scene. Like, after the fight scene, that's when the movie genuinely gets very interesting to me.
This is kind of piggybacking off your point that no corrupt senators would ever choose a radical with Billy's history as their patsy. One thing I thought during this scene is the whole deal is that Billy Jack's political enemies are making him out to be a fraud and a shyster, and his name is on the line. A figure in progressive spaces who's done the things that Billy's done in the previous movies, his supporters would immediately recognize this is a setup.
Yeah, that's a great fucking point.
People on the left, even like liberals, would be like, this is not consistent with anything Billy's ever done. He is like a pretty violent left-wing radical to some degree. Like, his reputation would not be on the line in the way that this movie... I know it's just for the sake of the plot to get to this court case. I understand. But Billy Jack's reputation in like left spaces, I think would be fine. Even if he lost this case. No one would say like, oh, you defrauded. Everyone would know that he was telling the truth.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me, and obviously, of course, he wasn't violent at all. I mean, he had violence perpetrated upon him against the state, of course, and, got rat-fucked out of the primary. But it kind of reminds me of the accusations of sexism about Bernie. Like, nobody bought that for a
The people saying it didn't buy it. It was so fucking fake.
Yeah, so fucking fake. And also that hot mic moment that fucking Warren had where she's like, you said I couldn't be president. Like, come on.
You just called me a liar on national television.
That was what she said. Yeah. And it's like, fuck you. You knew what you were doing when you did that shit. Fucking asshole. Oh my God. But no, yeah, like no Bernie supporter was like, oh yeah, Bernie's sexist. Nobody. Yeah, and you're right. Even the people who lobbied it against him didn't fucking think that.
Hey guys, because I did tell people when they would bring it up to me in 2016 and again in 2020, they go like, well, I would say, yeah, he is. And I'd walk away. Ah! That's what I said. Yeah, he's such a sexist. That's why I like him.
Yeah, you should have said that.
He
puts the broads in their place.
Yeah, I love it.
He tells them to go back to the kitchen.
Well, and the thing is, I thought the same thing. Not echoes, but, reminds me of our recent history in Sanders getting railroaded and things. And then it occurred to me that the reason that it's reminding me of Sanders isn't because this movie has seen the future. It's because history rhymes.
Yes.
And they've been doing this to progressive candidates forever. So Laughlin had a long history in the U.S. of progressive candidates getting railroaded in this way long before Bernie Sanders. But that's the reference point for us because we are millennials.
Exactly. Very much so. But yeah, so the rest of this movie, I'm not going to go over all the details of the filibuster, but yeah, essentially Payne says the reason that they don't want this nuclear power plant up there is that Billy Jack bought the land that the power plant is going to be on, so he has a personal interest. He didn't recuse himself from having that personal interest, and basically he has to filibuster for like the last 30, 40, 50 minutes of the movie, basically.
What's fantastic about that is Tom Laughlin is at his best, not when he's kickboxing, but when he's monologue. Truly, those are the action scenes in this movie. That's when you feel as emotionally invested. And maybe it's just me because I'm a dork, but it's because he's a great monologuer. He's got a lot of emotion. He's funny. He's likable. So
and he's acting against E.G. Marshall. He's acting against Senator Payne, and he's also a fucking phenomenal actor too. So like, you get two great actors, and I feel like we're the first people to ever say Tom Laughlin was a good actor, but he is a good actor in this movie, straight up.
People saying Tom Laughlin is a bad actor, I just don't agree. I understand. Okay.
I don't agree either.
I've said many times, I understand if people think the Billy Jack movies are silly. I understand if you think, there's lots of reasons someone of any generation might not like them. They're very low budget. Sometimes the editing's choppy, whatever. Laughlin has never been a bad actor. Laughlin was like a theater kid. He clearly spent a lot of time, and I've said this before, but I think it's so apparent, probably in his youth, very big fan of Brando. Heavy shades of young Marlon Brando in Laughlin's read. Maybe a little bit Jimmy Dean, but more Brando, I would say. His monologuing is great, and the whole last half of this movie is, it's kind of like, what's the fucking Ayn Rand novel? Is that Atlas Shrugged?
I think it's Atlas Shrugged. That's like a 400-page fucking monologue.
Fucking dumb bullshit.
Yeah. But no, honestly, I love, especially when he's been filibustering for, presumably days. Like, he's got like a 5 o'clock shadow. He's like stumbling around. He's so exhausted. He gets like the big fucking bags of letters that Senator Payne came and he's like, I got all these letters saying you should quit. You're a fucking bitch, Billy Jack. And then he pulls
You're fucking owned.
Yeah, you got fucking owned. He pulls it out. He's like, these fake letters. And he's just like going nuts and just like screaming. And he's good at it. He's really fucking good here.
He seems exhausted and at wit's end. So obviously, this whole segment, this is directly, I mean, the whole movie is a remake of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is a great movie. It's an American classic. I don't have to say much about it because it's fucking Jimmy Stewart. But this is one for one. This is literally Laughlin, I think, going, I love Jimmy Stewart in this movie. We're going to do this, but with my character.
I don't think anybody would ever say that Tom Laughlin is the Jimmy Stewart of the 70s. But at the same time, though, Tom Laughlin he's acting his fucking ass off here, and he's doing a good job. Once again, we need to reiterate that.
But imagine if Jimmy Stewart had done a movie where he played a Native American kickboxer.
You know, actually, that's another element. So, I mean, basically, the movie's over. Oh, actually, one more thing. So, essentially, Billy Jack does win at the very end. And also, Senator Payne's like, no, I'm the fraud. You should get rid of me as senator. Which, you know, I think I mentioned it, that this is like the apotheosis of all base lib entertainment. Which is like the idea of, if you can just argue your case hard enough, you'll eventually get everybody to admit that they're the fucking frauds and they will quit. Because that's what real democracy is.
When Senator Payne breaks down and goes, I'm the fraud. I'm the fraud. It made me think of, and I hate to repeat another podcast, but Felix and Chapo talking about how when he was 12, he wanted to recite the lyrics to War Pigs to George Bush. He was like, if I could just sing War Pigs to George Bush to his face, he would resign in jail. He was like, Mr. President, how much longer are you going to kill our troops for oil while censoring our shock jocks from saying fuck?
But no, that is like, you're right. That is absolutely the base lib fucking manifesto. It's like, yeah, just speak truth to power loud enough, and eventually they'll admit that, you know what, actually, son, you have a really good point. I will heed what you say and I will step aside, which never happens. What happens is the senators gay, hey, fuck you, kid, or hey, fat, get out of my way. And that's what they
Hey, fat, yeah. But I do think up to this point, the Billy Jack films have been fairly realistic about that. Although I do think they all end on kind of happy notes. I don't think that Laughlin had any naivete about that. I think this is, if you asked him, he would probably say that is never going to happen.
You know what's really funny is that this is the only Billy Jack movie where it doesn't end with him going to prison.
Yeah, and to be honest,
you know
I was thinking about that.
Is that the Billy Jack movies have the same ending arc as all the seasons of Trailer Park Boys?
Holy shit.
He always ends up going to jail for either almost murdering or actually murdering people in every single one except for this movie.
You know, and the thing is, I think, first of all, I was thinking about this after I watched it. I think Tom and Dolores maybe knew that this might be the last Billy Jack film, which is why they end it in such an upbeat way. Might have made sense if he'd ended up going to prison, right? Maybe they didn't want to do that because that leaves the door open for a potential sequel. And again, I don't think that Tom and Dolores are... So, Taylor, if you or I or one of our peers, an old millennial leftist, made a movie like this, we'd probably end it in a kind of cynical way or an ironic way. I know I probably would, to be honest.
I would end it like Bulworth. I would end it like Bulworth for sure, which is a mostly downer. I mean, it has a little bit of a like.
Bulworth is a downer ending.
Yes, I will agree with that.
That's a downer.
There's like a hint of hope in it, but yeah, it's a downer ending.
But just thinking about, I guess, if this movie ends with Billy Jack going to prison, and then this makes it of a piece with the other Billy Jack movies, I guess the difference is you're more likely, I was going to say, he's probably going to do worse time for this than he would have done for killing that kid or whatever. Yeah. But that's not true. A senator doing money deals, he'd be off the hook.
Well, not only that, but also the guy that he killed, even though he was raping a 12-year-old in that movie, I'm not kidding to the audience at home, that's literally what happens in the movie. But at the same time, that guy was the son of the sheriff, so he probably, realistically, he should have went away for like 100,000 years. Realistically, that's what would have, or he would have just been executed like 3 days later. Like, let's be real here. Oh, shit. But yeah, so that is the synopsis of this film. And before we get into our final thoughts, Brian, I wanted to get into our Amazon reviews. Now, there weren't that many Amazon reviews for this, I'm going to be honest. There was only 54 on the Amazon entry, which makes sense. This is not a very widely disseminated movie. Obviously, we talked about that. This is by far the least successful Billy Jack movie. So there weren't that many reviews, but I found 3. So our first review here is from GA, who gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, the film that the public did not get a chance to see. And the body of the review says, oh, poor Billy Jack. Whatever happened to you? Made mostly and very costly in Washington, D.C. locations, it was never shown on the movie circuits or the public screens, apparently for political sensitivity reasons. I mostly think it was just because
not very marketable.
Not very marketable, exactly. It is now available on DVD decades after it was created. The cast included the daughter of Walter Cronkite and Lucy Arnaz, and it was produced and starred Tom Laughlin and his wife Dolores Taylor. The story concerned itself with corruption in the Washington political inner circles, which made this a film non grata, and it died a financial death. Now it is an archival classic and should be treated as such by students of the cinema. The little film that never was. And also they had a little addition here. Tom Laughlin, actor, director, screenwriter, died December 12th, 2013. May he rest in peace. So I think this review was much older than that addendum, if I'm not mistaken. But I thought it was funny. They added the addendum years later. They're like, oh shit, I made a review for this movie 8 years ago. Let me fucking put an addendum on my Amazon review.
You know, I'm not going to push back too hard. You know, this guy seems like this person is coming from it, the same place where seem like an appreciator of Tom and Dolores, and, you know, probably very aware that they aren't very much spoken of, you know, or even known to the degree that maybe they should be, at least to like film nerds. This film did not fail because it never got a chance. It didn't get a chance. It is true that this film never got a chance.
That part's true, yes.
How good was it going to do? And I say this again, I love Billy Jack. I love Trial. I think Trial could have been like a huge smash, even as insane as it is.
You know, especially considering this was supposed to come out like December. I think it was supposed to come out Christmas of 1977, if I'm not mistaken. And in the late 70s, like post-Nixon era, a movie with this positive of like an ending on like our political system was never going to do well. The late 70s and early 80s were all about political cynicism if you were going to show that in a movie.
Yes.
All about that.
To your point, Taylor, we talked about how we've talked about New Hollywood a few times on the show, and we've talked about, I think, Laughlin being instrumental in ushering in New Hollywood. But
yes, very much so.
At 77, you are deep in that era. You've got your Scorsese's, your Coppola's, your fucking Oliver Stones. And by 77, Laughlin is looking a little behind the pack. The pack that he helped usher in terms of these new, edgy, politically conscious filmmakers. Like, this is almost like a PG, like, you know, it could be a PG movie.
Yeah, except for the guy getting stabbed, and then the rape scene. The rape scene, they probably could have gotten away with that if they just took out one line, like straight up.
Yeah, if you take out just that line, because PG movies had shit like that back then. So this movie, even a few years prior, Trial of Billy Jack, pretty edgy movie in its time. This movie for 77 does not feel edgy.
It feels very anachronistic. I'm going to be real here.
Yeah,
and of course it is. It's a remake of a 30s movie, so of course it's going to be a little anachronistic.
And again, like, people, I think, assume that the title Billy Jack Goes to Washington is some ironic commentary. It's like, oh, this action movie, but it's referencing Mr. Smith. It is not ironic. This has the same message as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And Laughlin is taking it deadly serious. He's holding Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in very high regard and trying very much to like echo its sentiment, which just isn't really what young people were turning out for in 77. If this movie gets a wide release, is it going to top Billy Jack in terms of box office numbers? Is it going to top Trial? No, because it's a civics lesson. It's literally there to say, we need to show kids how the Senate works. I'm sorry. I like this movie. You like this movie. We're fucking losers, Taylor. Also, I want to say the glaring omission of this movie. The title, Billy Jack Goes to Washington, becomes a senator, implies that he's going to drop kick some senators in a suit and tie on the Senate floor. That is what your mind conjures up when you hear the phrase Billy Jack Goes to Washington and you find out it's about him becoming a senator.
Could you imagine if Billy Jack would have like drop kicked Joe Biden and Strom Thurmond when they were like teaming up together? Could you fucking imagine that?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that would have been so based. But of course that didn't happen, unfortunately.
Someday, Taylor, we got to write down all of our imagined Billy Jack scenarios and we'll work on our reboot.
Well, actually, you know what? We'll save that trivia for the final Billy Jack episode.
Oh, yeah.
I want to save that.
I know already what you're referring to.
Oh, yeah.
God, imagine we could put in just funny lines that actual libs have said. We could have Billy Jack say to someone, look, fat.
Yeah, listen, fat.
To like a sumo wrestler.
Oh, God, I'm so excited to talk about that. All right, but our next review here is from Brad Moffat, who gives us 4 stars. And the head of the review says, interesting contrast to modern Washington. And interestingly enough, Brian, this is one of our very rare pre-9/11 reviews, which are always my favorite to watch, especially when it comes to political discussions. So that's why I included this one. I think this was from...
Yeah, this guy's still living in the end of history. I envy him.
I think this review was written in 2000, if I'm not mistaken. So this review says, Billy Jack fans will love this movie. Critics will hate it, but who cares what critics think? I agree. You should never listen to what we have to say.
I mean, if you're a Billy Jack fan, fair. People treated Tom like shit. The critics did. I'm sorry.
No, these movies were never critical darlings. They were never critical darlings, for sure. The thing I find the most interesting about this movie is how it seems to be quasi-Nostradamus-like in predicting future corruption in our capital. No.
That's not why it's... People are so fucking dumb.
The murder of a Washington insider seems to reflect the Vince Foster mystery. The big business influence of legislators, and I didn't say that wrong, and they just put legislators in here. And first off, I had nothing to do with this, okay? I want that to be very clear. And their irresponsible behaviors reflect the many scandals we've witnessed through the 70s and 80s. You have to hand it to Mr. Laughlin for his ability to look into the future with the scenes that constitute this movie. In the book that was written about the making of the Billy Jack series, it talks about how some legislators, they actually said it right this time.
What book?
I'm curious on that. They did not mention the name of the book at all, unfortunately. We're shaken by this movie, and how some even threatened to kill the project so it would not get to theaters. Billy Jack fans need to get this in their collection. Also, visit the Billy Jack website. It's worth a look.
Can you give me a link, buddy? This guy's like dangling information in front of me.
From 24 years ago, too. That's
God
the funny
damn.
part.
The thing is, I've looked. There isn't a comprehensive history of these films.
Maybe there was when Tom Laughlin. Maybe when Tom Laughlin was alive. Maybe
Just
there
start
was.
calling him Billy.
Now, Senator Tom. Then our final review here is just real quick. So this is a 2-star review from Hilda. And the head of the review says, bad. And the body of the review says, sound quality was very bad. And I think there's one thing you and I can both agree. This film is very poor quality. I think we can all say that.
Well, I mean, we did watch it on Daily Motion.
I watched the YouTube rip, I'll be honest, which is a little
Well,
better.
I'm going to tell you, like I said, I have the DVD box set, and the quality on all of them is not stellar. I mean, that actually makes me pretty sad. And when I got the,
Was it a Shout Factory release? Isn't it a Shout Factory?
It's not terrible. It's fine, but it's not great. You know, being that it's the definitive Billy Jack home release.
That blows my mind, because Shout Factory is usually really good.
It almost makes me wonder if there is like prints missing or something. Even when I was watching that, when I got the box set, and I just thought, boy, and again, I didn't watch this particular film, but I'm going to tell you, the picture quality on Born Losers and Billy Jack was not great. So I got to assume it's not great on Billy Jack Goes to Washington in the same set. But these films occupy such a weird place because so many people know about them. If you know about Taylor, I assume you knew kind of that Billy Jack existed just from being kind of a cult cinema nerd. That's how I was for a long time too. You know, I think that's true of a lot of people, but there's just like so much missing information and so much missing archives about these movies that are kind of a massive piece of like 1970s and 1960s Americana.
You know, honestly, the first time I heard of Billy Jack was the Todd in the Shadows review of the one-hit wonder song One Tin Soldier, which, of course, was the theme song for Billy Jack, I think, Trial. And at the very end of this movie, there is a remixed version sang by Tom Laughlin's daughter. And, that's where I first remember hearing it distinct. I was probably familiar with the series before then, but that's where I
You'd
remember
at least probably seen Billy Jack, seen his picture online.
You know what?
Something.
I remember actually when I was maybe a teenager, I remember on YouTube watching a video being badass beats up rednecks or whatever. And it was the scene in Billy Jack where he beats up Posner and his gang.
People love to post just that clip in the Billy Jack group over and over.
I mean, to be fair, it's an extremely legendary and iconic scene.
Yeah, so this isn't quite our last round with Billy Jack.
Not quite, no.
But, we've put a cap on the series. I'm honestly a little sad about it. That's part of why I put off doing this film. For me, talking about Tom Laughlin, talking about the Billy Jack series, like a cornerstone to what this podcast is about to me. The truth is there isn't a lot of discussion about these films, which are really interesting films. And there's a lot to talk about here. Whether you like them or you think they're good or not, whether you think the politics are well thought out, whether you think they're hackneyed or, there's just a lot to dive into with this series and nobody's doing it. Like I said, I'm in multiple Billy Jack Facebook groups. First of all, I'm on Facebook, so maybe that's part of it too. There is no one our age in there.
Oh yeah. Honestly,
No one.
we are the youngest of them by probably 2 or 3 decades, I would hazard a guess.
But yeah, 2 decades, maybe closer to 3. And these are movies that a lot of people will tell you they saw when they came out and they made this huge impression. So I won't go through every post. I did want to talk a little bit, Taylor, if we have time, about just some of my recent interactions leading up to this episode with people that saw Billy Jack, the films when they came out.
Yeah, fuck it. Let's go. Because, well, actually, I'll just say my final thoughts real quick.
Oh, yeah,
30
please.
seconds. So, my final thoughts, I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's got some of the best performances in the series. In all honesty, the last half of the movie is maybe my single favorite part of all the Billy Jack movies combined. I just genuinely love seeing Tom Laughlin just act his fucking ass off. But I can absolutely see why this movie bombed hard. It's very obvious why this movie fucking bombed hard. Even though I do love this movie and I love all the Billy Jack movies, I can see why this movie especially bombed really hard. Trial, I can kind of see, but even then, I think Trial had enough staying power to be financially successful. But this movie, I just don't see it. There's a reason why this movie had a very limited 3-week release in Milwaukee and fucking fell off after that.
Yeah, I pretty much am going to second what you'd say. I'm a little harsher on this movie than the other 3 Billy Jack films, because whereas those films, whatever flaws they have, first of all, they really, I mean, like, I have no issues against this movie. It is long. I don't mind it because I like Billy Jack, but I'm not going to put this on for someone who's not. Like, Taylor, I knew when I suggested you watch Billy Jack movies, I knew you would find them interesting. But I wouldn't be like, hey, let's watch this 2.5 long hour movie about how the senators are fucked up.
Yeah, like, if I was on a date and we'd be like, what do you want to watch? And I'm like, you want to watch a nearly 3-hour movie about a half Native American guy who beats up like 5 people and then argues about politics? They'd be like,
argues and then lectures you about social inequality.
It's like that meme of like, there's like a guy and a girl like watching a movie or whatever, like on a bed, and it's just like Billy Jack arguing in front of the Senate on the TV.
The weakest of the finished Billy Jack films. If you're a fan of Billy Jack, there's only 4 finished movies, and it's still essential, I would say. If you're like looking to study these movies the way we have, you should watch it.
It's the most ideological, like, consistent of all the movies.
Yes.
So that's why it is definitely a complete and essential Billy Jack movie for motherfucking sure. All right. So yes, with at least my final thoughts out of the way, Brian, I think I want to end the episode here at the very least with, of course, our final thoughts, but also some of the findings that you have gotten from looking at the Billy Jack fan group pages. So I'm just very interested because I know we just talked about it a couple minutes ago here. I'm so excited, dude.
Well, for as long as there has been a Millennials Are Old podcast presence on social media, I have been hanging out in, among some other groups, Billy Jack fan pages on Facebook. They're only on Facebook. There is not a Billy Jack subreddit that seems very active. There are not, that I have found, Billy Jack or Tom Laughlin Instagram accounts. Maybe there are. It's all Facebook because it's for boomers. I mostly just observed the posts by the people in there. And by the way, the official Billy Jack fan page is pretty well moderated, considering that it's literally just a boomer group. One of the admins is, I believe, Tom's nephew. And actually, I realized this just now while we were processing the last segment. I clicked on one of the admins on this group is still listed as Tom Laughlin. You can find his official Facebook page. Looks like he was very active in the group, was talking with fans about the films and his beliefs and what he thought the films meant as late as 2012, right before he passed away. Actually kind of hit me a little hard. I didn't expect to find that. So I would just sort of hang out when we'd post the Billy Jack episodes, the older ones we did, and I'd say, hey, we're a show that talks about generational politics. We're a couple of younger guys, and we're fans of the series, and this is what we think. And I got some nice feedback. I also got people who I think were just happy that we were talking about it that didn't actually listen to the episode. I've recently started engaging more directly. It's tricky because I know that our politics, Taylor, even though this is not a strictly speaking a political show, are going to be further left to some degree than almost anyone in this group, even though it's a Billy Jack group.
Oh, 100%. Yes, absolutely.
So my whole thing is I'm trying to do a look but don't touch. Also, since this is run by Tom's nephew, and this was Tom's actual page, and it looks like he tried very hard to keep it classy and dignified and just very welcoming. So I'm not doing like any trolling, even though I really want to, because it'd be so easy. You know, I'm serious. So my first post is I'm just going to read these couple of posts I made here and we'll go through some of the nice ones. My first one, just to kind of boil the frog, was what would Billy, not Tom, think about the current state of the country. Who would he support? Would he support any of them? Now, Taylor, you and I know the question, or the answer to these questions, but I made 4 options. Billy would like Trump. Billy would like Biden. Then I started mixing it up. I went, Billy would like Bernie. Then I said, Billy would like Palestine. We're going to look at the replies here. Billy would like Trump got 10 votes. Billy would like Biden got 4 votes. Interesting, because certainly between Trump and Biden, Tom and Billy would have liked Biden. Billy would like Bernie, which of course is an option I added, but also that's what I voted, got 3 votes. Although according to the replies, other people thought that, but I guess they didn't vote in the poll. One of the people who replied Billy would like Bernie was Tom's nephew.
That's a pretty ringing endorsement, I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like, the part of the reason I said who would Billy and not Tom is because I wasn't interested in hypothesizing about what a dead man who wasn't here to represent himself would say, so I made it about the character, but it's pretty interchangeable. One person voted Billy would like Palestine. Although I agree with that, but this one guy, his name is James, he is an absolute king of boomers. This guy looks really old, but he believes that Billy Jack would support Palestine above all else. He's a king. A guy named Christopher added an option. These are all strictly speaking boomers. Billy trusted no one in government and wouldn't start now. This got 16 votes. Overwhelmingly the favorite. Objectively a good answer. I'm going to say something because this is my poll and he commandeered it and then his option won and it pissed me off. That's a cop-out.
I will say, though, it is a conceivable answer, though. I genuinely do think
it is. No, that is the obvious answer. Billy wasn't about the government. He was about causes. But also my poll did get commandeered by a boomer who then crushed all of my other options, which that's also a good answer because it sidesteps and you don't actually have to engage with the politics within the group. Just going to go through some of the replies. Nothing super interesting in this post. Lady named Kim, who I mentioned earlier, just said, I vote Trump, ellipses.
I don't know how you could watch these movies and think that Billy Jack would support fucking Trump. I just don't understand that.
I don't either, but you know how aging melts people's minds and everything becomes relative. And, in the Trump voters' head, everything gets connected. So they might say, well, Billy might have been a Democrat in the 70s, but they have changed so much that now he'd like Trump. I don't know. I agree. That's nonsense. This doesn't make sense because, again, these are explicitly political films. A gentleman named Daniel posted the SpongeBob imagination gif with the rainbow, but instead of imagination, it's saying nobody cares. Thank you, Daniel. A little rude. I think BJ would... This is Bruce, I'm sorry. I think BJ would vote for American values that include, but not limited to, freedom to do what you thought was good for yourself and everyone around you. That's literally a non-answer. That's what everyone votes for, right? I'm just being a dick now. It's a fine thing to say,
I mean, you're 100% correct, though. That is a cop-out answer. Like, let's be real here.
Well, I'm just going to warn you, there's a lot of these here. Natya, Avatar is the flag of Israel, just so you know.
This is going to be a great answer. I can very clearly tell.
It's not that, but not as bad as you're thinking. He'd back none of them, and then he'd say, when politicians break the law, there isn't any law, just to fight for survival. Again, like, that's fine.
An Israel flag person posting that? Interesting.
Yeah, I know.
I wonder what state abides by that rule recently.
And it's interesting because you get a lot of responses like this. Bruce and Natya both posted things like that, which, like, I guess are true, but they're also not answers to my question.
Although, to be fair, the Israel flag thing, though, her response is a very archetypal, like, liberal Zionist answer, though.
Yes.
So she might just be like an ultra-lib Zionist.
So a individual named Dakota, I cannot tell what irony level Dakota is on, says Billy Jack would be an incognito assassin. Cool answer. Based. It reads to me like a joke, but I don't think it is.
Well, I mean, the thing is that Billy Jack never assassinated. All the violence he committed was broadly out in the public. So, or was at the very least well known by people after it happened.
And I checked to see... Oh my God. So I'm checking because I think that implies something about Dakota's politics, which is that he's probably pretty right wing because he thinks Billy Jack would be murdering politicians Dakota guy thing. In 2020, Dakota said in the Billy Jack fan page, why did Nixon falsely report the My Lai massacre after forming the task force? So Dakota doesn't believe in My Lai, I guess.
I don't even know if that's necessarily a right-wing belief now. That's a bizarre opinion to have now.
Yeah. An individual said none. He'd run himself or get behind my man Bernie Sanders. There's a couple other ones like this that just basically older base libs that, like Bernie. And they say, I think he'd probably like Bernie, which is what I voted. In my own poll, that's what I kind of said. The interesting thing about this individual, who seems very nice and has given me very thoughtful responses to both of my discussion posts, he also posted an ad by a pretty xenophobic anti-immigrant sheriff and said, what do you think of this guy? In a way that indicated he might like him. So I don't know what's going on with this guy. A lady named Diane, who comes back in our next post, says, I think he would run himself like he did before. Fine answer. The last response on here is, again, by Tom's nephew, Joseph. Maybe two of the admins might actually be related to Tom, I think. But Joseph says, he didn't like Trump when he was alive. I know he wouldn't like him now. And then gave me a peace sign. So pretty straightforward. Nothing too wild here. I'm sorry. I know we're running a little long, but this is the doozy. I'd kind of stirred the pot. I was kind of testing to see how nice conversation would be. And I was surprised to see there weren't any nasty fights. People pretty much answered in good faith, except for the guy that said, nobody cares. Fuck you, Daniel. Nobody cares about your fucking posts, bitch. But okay, this is what I really wanted to get in the groups. I'm acutely aware and have been since we did Born Losers. I would like to talk with someone who has seen at least one of these movies and is interested in talking about it, whether they like it or not, who's Native American, to have an actual conversation with them about it. Doesn't really matter how old they are. Doesn't matter if they like it or not. I made a post that reads, anyone on this page who is Native American and has seen at least one of the Billy Jack films, how do you feel about the representation of indigenous people in the films? And how do you feel about Laughlin's portrayal? I love the films. This is just to make sure everyone knows I'm not being an asshole. I love the films and admire Tom a great deal, but I think it's fair to say his legacy is complicated in that regard. Boy, that last sentence really threw some people for a loop.
As we mentioned on an earlier episode, Facebook boomers really love analyzing race in a very nuanced and intelligent way.
Oh, boy, just you wait. So I want to say this is in a boomer Facebook group. I feel like this is a very mild post. Obviously, I'm coming at it as a fan. I'm trying to have a good faith discussion. And my feeling is Tom and Dolores would encourage this conversation if they were alive now. They would probably be like, things have changed. Maybe it affects the way people, you know what I mean?
Well, even in the movies, though, it's clear that Tom was actually he put a lot of actual Native American people in his movie on top of it and helped showcase a lot of their cultures to wider and whiter audiences. You know what I mean?
And a couple of responses from some people who are Native American said things to that effect. But there's some good ones in here on all sides. First of all, I want to say that even though these are Facebook boomers, I was heartened to see that while there were some nasty comments, which I really, like I said, my initial thing was a pretty neutral and, just open, curious conversation. A lot of them were people that answered in good faith and pretty much understood why I was asking, which I was surprised to see and was nice. Lawrence says, Lord, just enjoy the movies. This is the beginning of a trend. This is a more mild one, but it gets more explicit, as you'll see. People saying, just enjoy the movies. Why do you got to pick them apart? Why do you got to make them about race and politics? Well, because that's what the fucking movies are about.
Yeah.
That's why fucking Tom made them. Okay? It is more disrespectful, in my opinion, to watch a Billy Jack film and just go, I just like it for the story. I don't even think about politics. I think that would make Tom very upset to learn that his fans were doing that.
100% yes. No bullshit. Abso-fucking-lutely he would think that.
So much more disrespectful to just go, oh, he just made entertaining, mindless films, when that was so not what he was trying to do, One lady says, because again, I said his legacy is complicated in the regard of portrayals of Native Americans. The lady just says, how is it complicated? I didn't respond to her because I didn't feel like it, because it just seemed like there was too much I'd have to explain. But we get a few responses that say things. A lot of people just say, I love Billy Jack and I love the movies. That's their answer.
Which is also a non-answer.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I think they just were excited to say they love Billy Jack.
If that's genuinely the case, that's fine.
I mean, I think they were literally just I think they're great. A lot of people kind of don't, in the replies, don't grapple with the racial element, which is specifically what I'm talking about. And they say, well, his movies have a message and it's a good message. To me, that's a silly thing to say in the Billy Jack official fan page. You should assume that everyone in this group knows that. Okay, here's another one. It's by Debbie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and he's one of my fictional heroes. So I think I'm not going to pick the movies apart. Why the fuck not? If you love the movies, and 4 people like that, I know these are, I'm one of the 4 people because I liked everything because I'm trying to encourage people to keep talking. But if you love this movie that's explicitly it's not vaguely political. It's about progressive politics, the whole series.
It's explicitly political. Explicitly political.
But that's what a lot of people said. A lot of people specifically used the phrase picking the movie apart. That's a very strange phrase, but that's how a lot of people, they were like, oh, you're picking them apart. And it's like, am I? Am I even being that anal retentive about it? I don't know.
I don't think so, no. At the very least, not in like a negative or critical way. You're literally just saying, hey, I like these movies, but there is an element to them that may or may not have aged well for modern audiences. What do you guys think of that? Is that important? Is that relevant? Like, this is just basic media analysis, for God's sakes. Like, seriously.
Yeah, so this is a good one. So an individual named Jonathan, this is my least favorite fucking comment here because it's so disrespectful to Tom and Dolores, in my opinion. Pure entertainment. Whether it's supposed to represent real or imagined struggles on Indian land doesn't really matter in these movies. It's pure entertainment, and I enjoy them. Tom Laughlin and his wife did an outstanding job. So very weird to say that it might possibly be fictional Native American struggles. Also, I'm just going to try not to do this. This guy's name is John Smith. It doesn't matter if these are real
I think I mentioned that to you at first when I saw the name John Smith. I was like, oh yeah, the guy who fucking raped Pocahontas when she was like 12 years old.
And so there are a lot of responses by people just saying, I don't want to pick the movies apart. Sure, whatever. And I do have a reply to that. But this guy is actively, I think, kind of trying to say, I enjoy the movies, but I dismiss the reality of what it says about Native Americans. I did not reply myself because an individual who I actually privately messaged, this individual who replied and said, hey, I do a show. We talk about movies. We're talking about Billy Jack Goes to Washington. And we've talked about the other films I'd really like to use about. This is an individual named Lyle Miller. I'm only saying his name because he's very active, lives in one of the Dakotas. He's very active in the Native American community. He is Native American. And I don't think John Smith replied to this guy's comment, but I was so glad that someone said it. This guy looks old, by the way. He looks to be about in his late 70s. Tom went to the hometown of his wife, Dolores, and witnessed firsthand the inhumane conditions and ill treatment to Dakota, who lived near the outskirts of town in makeshift shelters. Very poor living, and this is what inspired him to make films Billy Jack. I would suggest you consider this before you think of the movies as pure entertainment. Thanked Lyle for his comment, asked for permission to read that. He replies to a few other people who say the same thing, because this seems to be a guy who spends a lot of his time in that community. And he and some other people who are Native American did say, first of all, none of, as far as I can tell, none of the Native American boomers, none of them got mad at me for asking this question, even if they didn't care about Tom being white, but they at least all understood why I was asking. But that was one of the things, there's a pretty stark divide. The responses you'll see range from people who I don't think understand the question and say, they're good movies with a message. There's people saying, they're bringing light to this issue nobody was talking about. They really hadn't been portrayed in film before. A lot of people saying that Billy Jack made a profound impact on them, seeing them as kids. I had a guy here who says he got into kickboxing and became like a youth counselor because of the films. I did also speak to a woman who was one of the people who posted in our poll. I'm forgetting her name now. We just talked to her. Who first was mad at me. She was kind of yelling at me. I think he was saying, I don't think you should accuse Tom of being racist. You can't hold him to today's standards. And I replied, I never said he was racist. And nobody else except you has used the word racist here.
And that's clearly not what you or I are doing when we review these fucking movies.
Right. But I think once she realized that I wasn't trying to be mean to Tom Laughlin, she started telling me, he's my hero and I have all of his books. And I was trying to go hey, where did you get those books? I'm trying to get them. I was kind of hoping she'd offer to sell me some of them, but I don't think she'll bite. But that's and I'm going to remain active in this. Oh, hang on. Here's a good one. Here's one more bad reply. Don't make this a racist woke issue. He made good movies. Let it be. Why are you watching these movies? What are they about to you? There's no fucking action scenes in them. All of the drama is based on the knowledge that the atrocities happening are happening in reality and that they're important.
You know what that reminds me of, actually, and this is obviously totally opposite political spectrum, but there was a review that kind of went a little viral recently of somebody reviewing Birth of a Nation. And they're like, well, if you ignore the horrendous politics, this is a really, very quality, that's the whole point of that movie is the shit politics.
That's what it is. And so you talked about Taylor. You had mentioned you don't understand how someone could watch these movies and enjoy them and not care about the politics or like Donald Trump. I have given that some thought, having read there's a lot more of these comments, but I've pretty much hit all of they become variations on the themes I mentioned, you know? But one of the things I think is that there are people like you and I, not very many of us who are younger, who watch the movies, who like strange films, and we like to look at things from other angles. There are people who grew up to maybe be and they're all boomers. I don't think that there's even any Gen Xers really in this group, to be honest, as far as I can tell.
There probably is not.
There's us and a bunch of boomers and older boomers at this point. But there's some people who say, oh, I saw it as a kid, made a really big impact on me. Tom was a good guy, and he inspired me in this, and this way. And you get responses from people who say that, whose politics are kind of all over, but they lean more towards like left libs, based libs, you know, just from glancing at their profiles and talking at them a little bit. But when I think about the people who say, why do you have to make it about woke things? Why do you got to think about the politics? I think that their thing is that they watched the movie growing up and they're purely judging it on that. So it's like, this is a thing from my childhood. It's not because they particularly like the movies in the way that you or I do, or that some of the other people in these groups do. And they're just thinking like, this is a thing from the 70s. I remember this and it's good. And I don't want people to bring their modernity to it.
It's the most base, like, nostalgia. It's the most base nostalgia.
And what is there to watch in a Billy Jack movie? Okay, I could even see liking the movies and not agreeing with all the politics, but being just completely disinterested. What is there?
It makes no sense. Like, you know, obviously there are things like conservatives love fucking Rage Against the Machine or something like that. And you're like, well,
but that's a band. That's a little different.
I was gonna say though, that's the opposite of that. Yeah, because they make fucking badass songs that, like, you know, obviously they're fucking leftist. But, you know, if you're brain dead, you could, just like with Equilibrium with your ideology, you could transfix a lot of different ideologies onto a lot of different Rage songs. You could very clearly do that. Whereas this movie, though, this movie, there is not. There is only one ideology. There is base liberalism and left liberalism. That is it. You cannot be a reactionary. You can't be like, yeah, a fucking Trump supporter. And like, if you're 2016 era Trump supporter and you watch this movie, you're like, yeah, fucking Billy Jack is badass for, wait, what? Like, you couldn't do that. This is a very hyper specific movie. Like, let's
gonna be generous. Could be a 2016 Trump boomer supporter who was like, oh, he's like an outsider and he just says what he thinks. I could see those rubes liking Billy Jack. If you still like Trump in 2020, I don't know why you're watching these movies. I don't know what's in here for you. And again, I very mildly was like, hey, this is a thing that, you know, Tom portrays a Native American character. He portrays Native American culture, but he's white. What does everyone think of that? That alone made some people so mad. There were some really nasty replies here. Pretty nasty. That, oh, hang on. One of them, can't remember the guy's name, but it just said, just enjoy the movies, knucklehead. I was in Donnie Brasco, by the way, which is one of my favorite replies. Because I didn't understand. Was he bringing up that he was in Donnie Brasco because it was in some way relevant to the racial conversation, or just was he like bragging to me? Like,
yeah, what the fuck?
But again, I was really heartened by how many of these old people basically were like, yeah, that's a good question. I'd like to talk about that. And my ultimate answer is, you can still criticize these movies for Tom Laughlin being white playing a Native American. You'd still love his performance and think, oh, that we wouldn't do that now. I think Tom probably might not do that now. If he were making these movies now, he might not have made the character Native American. He might not have played him. But I definitely think that Tom would welcome these conversations. So if any fans of the Billy Jack series ever listen to our shows and they think, oh, they're picking him apart, I think that's what Tom would want. That's how he wanted these movies to be taken seriously and to be considered.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the ultimate lesson, is that Tom wants you to think about these fucking movies. Or at least he did, obviously, want you to think about these fucking movies. Like, seriously, don't be a brain dead Billy Jack fan. I think that's the ultimate lesson. Don't be a brain dead Billy Jack fan.
And then to underline that with, I guess, kind of my final thoughts on the series, although we will be doing an epilogue eventually, as we've said. But these are movies with a lot to consider from a historical standpoint, from a political standpoint, from just like a filmmaking standpoint. And nobody's really considering them. When you see people, even in these dedicated fan groups, when you see people talking about Billy Jack, it's as a shorthand for 70s nostalgia. there is really not very much documentation, not very much analysis of these movies. And that's a damn shame to me. That's the whole reason I've wanted to talk about these films, because no one is. And they're such unusual pieces of American cinema history. And they're pretty important movies, whether you like them or not. There's nothing else like them. I mean, Tom Laughlin was a true auteur. And really, I hate to think that, Taylor, I think in the modern age, you and I might be the like definitive scholars of Billy Jack. I'm not kidding.
No, I think you're 100% serious.
And that makes me, I'm proud of that to a degree, but it makes me let our podcast with 1 monthly listener, 2 monthly listeners. We are the only people, it seems, that are going out of our way to give these movies the time of day in 2024. And when you watch them, you just, so much of it is, there's stuff that isn't perfect. Obviously, he's not as like explicitly leftist as you or I would be. But again, this is in the late 60s and the 70s, So much of what he's saying, you're like, oh, for the time, that's kind of wild that he was just saying it like that. And I would love for more people to get turned on to these movies, even if you think they're dated, even if you think they're cheesy, even if you think it's offensive that he's playing a native character. And, it kind of is. I understand. I really wish more people at least thought about these movies to some degree and didn't just go, oh, Billy Jack, that's the thing from the 70s, because that's what people think of when they see that face. And it's such a great performance. It's such a cool character.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm probably repeating myself.
It's all right. But yeah, most definitely, I would be absolutely excited to just obviously capstone our Billy Jack series once we get to our final episode in the series, which will, of course, be the return of Billy Jack. But, we've been recording for, I believe, 15 hours now. So I think it's... But no, I will agree. 100%. Absolutely watch this movie. Watch all the other Billy Jack movies. And please stay tuned for our final epilogue where we get into Return of Billy Jack and our final thoughts. But yes, ending this episode here, let's get into our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on twitter.com. And as well, please follow us on both our YouTube and our Spotify profile where we upload every single episode simultaneously to both platforms. I am releasing episodes bi-weekly now because, to be honest with you, editing is really fun. I'll just put it that way. But it is also very time exhausting. So I'm releasing them every 2 weeks now, but they will come out. And also, as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father GoFundMe. Of course, once again, Robert, Scott, and Sean are all great friends of the show, and they're making a very interesting series. They've released the very first episode. Look it up on YouTube as well. We really want to see episode 2, so please donate to the campaign.
Yeah, you know what? I'll say if anyone wants to donate like 10 or 15 bucks, I will match, and I'll make another donation to match that.
Hell.
Unless this goes crazy and a bunch of people that have never listened to the show before do it. I just can't.
Yeah. Oh, shit. And then, Brian, you manage the social medias, right?
Yes. Follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram, all one word, to update all the new episodes. You can see all the e-thoughts that we follow, that Taylor follows. But more actively, the Millennials Are Old Facebook page, which again, of course, post in the Billy Jack pages. I post a few other places once in a while if there's something relevant to specifically to generational stuff. Continue being more active on there because it is really fun getting to engage with, sorry to say it is all these boomers and Gen Xers primarily, but they bring a good element to the show and to the discussion. I want to say again, thanks to anyone who's listened to, of course, anyone who's listened to the show at all, but anyone that's listened to the Billy Jack episodes, it really means a lot to me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I am, once again, very excited to see the updates of your Facebook adventures. And I'm so excited to finally watch.
I got to think of some other stuff that I want to ask them. I mean, eventually I should reach out to the admins and see if we can just talk to one of them if they'd like.
Honestly, just getting one of them on the show for like an interview, that would be a really good like addendum to this. Like,
yeah,
I would be so fucking down for that, for goddamn sure.
Yeah, I have a blast talking about these movies. Yeah, hit me up. I'm John Stab on Twitter as well. If you want to talk about Billy Jack with me, I'm there.
Fucking hell yeah. And you know what? Speaking of course, we reviewed Billy Jack Goes to Washington. I think, Brian, it's time for both of us, both Millennials Are Old, to go to bed. Would you agree with that?
Brian James goes to bed.
And Taylor R. No, fuck, I'm not going to put my last name on there. Shit, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to edit that shit out. You will never I'm going to put a beep in there.
Yeah, be careful.
But
shit. Can I just say one more line in Billy Jack Goes to Washington? Okay, there is a scene where they're talking about how radicals and civil rights leaders are murdered by the powers that be, and Billy Jack's journalist friend says, you know what they do to people like you? They kill you, just like they killed Martin Luther King and Jimmy Hoffa.
Hell yeah,
implying that Hoffa was murdered not by the mob, but by the U.S. government for being a radical leftist.
Certainly possible. But you know what? Speaking of Brian, we're speaking about too much truth to power. We got to get off here before we get killed.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Goodbye.
All right, good night.
Have a good night, everybody.